Gestalt psychology is a school of thought that looks at the human mind and behavior as a whole. It is a theory that states individuals perceive objects as a whole rather than their parts. It is our ability to acquire and maintain meaningful perceptions in an apparently chaotic world. In fact, the word Gestalt means unified or meaningful whole. Originating in the work of Max Wertheimer in the early 19th century, Gestalt psychology formed partially as a response to the structuralism of Wilhelm Wundt. The development of this area of psychology was influenced by a number of thinkers, including Immanuel Kant, Ernst Mach, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. So who was this Max Wertheimer? He was born in Prague on April 15, 1880. His father was a teacher and the director at a commercial school. Max studied law for more than 2 years, but decided he preferred philosophy. In 1910, psychologist Max Wertheimer had an insight when he observed a series of lights flashing on and off at a railroad crossing. It was similar to how the lights encircling a movie theater marquee flashed on and off. Have you ever noticed how a series of flashing lights often appear to be moving, such as neon signs or strands of Christmas lights? According to Gestalt psychology, this apparent movement happens because our minds fill in missing information.
There are multiple principles of Gestalt psychology. Here are a few of the most common ones that we talk about today. We refer to these principles as heuristics, which are, in other words, shortcuts for solving problems. Proximity. The principle of proximity states that perception tends to group stimuli that are close together as part of the same object, and stimuli that are far apart are perceived as two separate objects. This allows for the grouping together of elements into larger sets and reduces the need to process a large number of smaller stimuli. For this reason, people tend to see clusters of dots on the page instead of a large number of individual dots. The brain groups together the elements instead of processing a large number of smaller stimuli, allowing us to understand and conceptualize information more quickly. Similarity. The principle of similarity states that, all else being equal, perception lends itself to seeing stimuli that physically resemble each other as part of the same object, and stimuli that are different as part of a different object. This allows for people to distinguish between adjacent and overlapping objects based on their visual texture and resemblance. Other stimuli that have different features are generally not perceived as part of the object. Our brain uses similarity to distinguish between objects who may lay adjacent to or overlap with each other based upon their visual texture. Continuity. The law of continuity holds that points that are connected by straight or curving lines are seen in a way that follows the smoothest path. Rather than seeing separate lines and angles, lines are seen as belonging together. Figure and ground. The concept of figure and ground perception is often illustrated with the classic faces or vases illusion, also known as the Rubin vase. Depending upon whether you see the black or white as the figure, you may see either two faces in the profile, meaning you perceive the black color as the figure, or a vase in the center, meaning you see the white as color in the figure. Closure. The principle of closure refers to the mind's tendency to see complete figures or forms, even if a picture is incomplete, partially hidden by other objects, or if the information needed to make a complete picture in our minds is missing. For example, if part of the shape's border is missing, people still tend to see the shape as completely enclosed by the border and ignore the gaps. This reaction stems from our mind's natural tendency to recognize patterns that are familiar to us and thus fill in any information that may be missing. Each of these principles tell us that humans automatically perceive stimuli in group as opposed to their individual parts. These Gestalt principles were introduced in a seminal paper by Wertheimer. Unfortunately, Wertheimer did not live to see that his past contributions to psychology were recognized. 45 years after his death, he was awarded in 1988 the William Wundt Medal of the German Psychological Society. The award acknowledged his experimental work represented by his original studies of perception of apparent motion, the development of the influential Gestalt theory, and the application of a Gestalt thought to significant issues of epistemology, ethics, social, and political science.
Although Gestalt psychology no longer survives as a separate entity, it has had an enormous impact. Two people in particular led the way in introducing it into other aspects of psychology: Kurt Lewin and Kurt Goldstein. Kurt Lewin created a topological theory that expressed human dynamics in the form of a map representing a person's life space. The map is patterned with one's needs, desires, goals, and vectors or arrows indicating the directions and strengths of these forces. This was called the field theory. Lewin understood that change requires an understanding of all the factors that impact the change. This is particularly the case when things have become routine, established, and resistant to change. This diagram shows a way of representing this life space map. Your current state is shown on one end, and your goal on the other. Around you and your goal are forces that contribute to and restrain you from realizing your goal. These forces are psychological. These invisible forces, pushing and pulling your thoughts and behavior, combine to create what Lewin referred to as your life space. This life space can be represented as a topology or map we navigate towards our goals. This topology is constantly shifting. The goal may at times seem like it remains on the horizon, or barriers may fall and it's suddenly within reach. According to Kurt Lewin's field theory, change is rarely a linear path from here to there. We may focus on one or two driving forces such as a key relationship. As soon as we start, we may come head on with a key challenge and need to take a turn. We gain some skills, learn to adapt, then turn back towards our goals and overcome the challenge. Kurt Goldstein was the second main person to help lead Gestalt theories into other aspects of psychology. Goldstein wrote The Organism in 1939 and later Human Nature in the Light of Pathology in 1963. Goldstein's main concern in The Organism was to apply the figure-ground principle of Gestalt psychology from perception to the whole organism, presuming that the whole organism serves as the ground for the individual stimulus forming the figure. He points out that the experience of individuals with lesioned brains make it obvious that our neurological and neuropsychological functioning is socially intertwined with that of other brains. In this work, Goldstein also claimed that specific colors elicit specific emotional responses. Another one of Goldstein's famous works is his Human Nature in the Light of Pathology. Little new material is presented in the book due to most of the material being from his early work on brain injuries. Goldstein developed a holistic view of brain function based on research that showed that people with brain damage learn to use other parts of the brains in compensation. He extended his holism to the entire organism and postulated that there was only one drive in human functioning, and coined the term self-actualization. His idea of self-actualization influenced quite a few young personality theorists and therapists. Among them would be Gordon Allport, Carl Rogers, and Abraham Maslow, founders of the American humanistic psychology movement. Self-actualization represents a concept derived from humanistic psychological theory, and specifically from the theory created by Abraham Maslow. Self-actualization, according to Maslow, represents growth of an individual towards fulfillment of the highest needs, those for the meaning in life in particular. Gestalt psychology can be related to Wundt from our History of Psych class. We can do this because Gestalt psychology discusses how the brain often perceives things as a whole. Wundt emphasized not the elements themselves, but rather the process of actively organizing those elements. Voluntarism is the idea that the mind has the capacity to organize mental contents into higher-level thought processes. Gestalt psychologists say we are built to experience the structured whole as well as the individual sensations. Not only do we have the ability to, but we have a strong tendency to see things as a whole.